Now, how many of you are thinking about hunting a new area this year? It can be a daunting task. I've hunted out of state a lot. It seems like that I hunt on public land every year. Some big trips. Last year we went to Pennsylvania. I went to Ohio for 7 or 8 years to hunt. I really love hunting new big ground parcels and trying to figure it all out. UP Michigan, when I first moved up there, going out into these thousands of acres of swamps and woods and beaver lodges and dams and lakes, small ponds, marshes, swamps. It really was daunting. How do you start? And I think there's a really good formula or a set of steps that you can use to get yourself pointed in the right direction this year. And I like to spend it. I'll point out 80% of the time to me is spent on the couch looking at HuntWise. I like HuntWise because there's 5 different aerial maps that we can use, so I can see all those colors and shapes on there, and I can pick the one that gives me the most contrast so that I can see the most color and get most up to date satellite. So it's pretty important to spend the majority of the time on the couch, and I'll talk about why. The new spot. How do you find a new spot? I like looking for areas that I think I can get into and find a hidden hot spot where no people will get to. So let's say I'm looking at a smaller public land parcel in lower Michigan. It's 700 acres. If I see that there's a lot of swamp to cross, if I see on the north side it's very difficult to get to, I might have to use a canoe, waders. I might have to try to knock on a door and get permission, especially if you do that during the spring or summer, meaning not to hunt someone's land, but just to cross through their land. And it might even be just a 1 acre. I've hunted Pontiac State Recreation Area, and I found someone that was willing to let me walk in between their house and the neighbors. They probably had a 1/4 acre in that spot in a subdivision, but it got me to public land where someone else had to walk in a half mile, 3/4 mile. So I felt like I was getting into this hidden hotspot, and it was a hotspot just because people weren't there. So first of all, you're looking at sometimes if it's a smaller parcel, you're looking for those hidden access routes or difficult access routes to put you into a location where very few other hunters go. Even in the UP of Michigan, where it's very vast, I went across 2 beaver dams to get back to a spot. And each beaver dam I felt eliminated 80% of the people that would make it there. So by the time I went through two, I was basically one of the few, if not the only one on a given year that would even go back there. And then there's the other extreme where you're looking at large areas. One of the areas I hunted in Ohio was over 60,000 acres of public land that was very vast. And so because of the size, you could find areas and get in far enough where you just got away from other people. So I choose an area like that. A lot of times you're saying, well, I want to hunt this state, I want to hunt this county. And from there, you narrow it down. And so you already have chosen, I want to go to this area of Ohio. Well, then I look at what's available for public land, and then I pick that and go. Maybe your spot is Maryland, maybe it's Pennsylvania, maybe it's Minnesota, northern Minnesota, up in the big swamps and wilderness areas. You pick your area, you have it narrowed down. From right there, I'm going to pick a spot, and I'm going to say, okay, I want to stay here because it's 15 miles from this town I want to go to. They have good lodging there, and I just think it looks pretty remote. Well, there I narrow it down to a spot, and I start canceling acres. And what I mean by that is I'm looking at where are cabins, where is a good distance I can get into. So I'm looking at roads, parking areas, and cabins, and I'm saying, well, I don't want to be anywhere within a half mile of there, a 1/4 mile from there, whatever you choose. And then I'm just taking that map, and you can even just take a screenshot and mark it up, but you just start drawing on it, and you're drawing out areas that you don't want to hunt. And you have to be very critical of this and say, well, this looks kind of cool. This is a good topo feature. This looks like a good funnel. If it's within that distance, stick to your guns and say, I don't want to be within a half mile of any road, any cabin, any parking area, any campground, any boat launch, whatever it might be, where you have all these expected people areas, access roads. We're Dylan, Jen, and I went hunting last year. We'd go on a main access road where a lot of people walk on. We didn't see anybody on that road, did we? Well, we saw tracks. So we knew they'd been there, but we went in before light, after dark. Bottom line, there's people that went through there, but we didn't want to hunt next to there. So then you start Xing out this area a quarter mile on either side. Well, you're taking out many, many acres. You can take out thousands of acres on a long walk just because you're Xing out those campgrounds, boat launch, parking areas, roads, access routes. Just get rid of them. And it might be that there's a good hunting spot within there. That's not the point. You want to narrow it down so that you're getting into that lower funnel where you're finding that really good hot spot that's hidden. And for a lot of reasons, there should be a buck there. Not those areas that, yeah, this is a cool spot, kind of a corner. It's a forgotten corner. I want something I could look at and say, you know what, I can hunt in this location for years to come because it meets these features. So I'm going to cancel out a lot of acres. And what I find is you pick an area that's 5,000, 10,000 acres on public land, you're probably going to narrow that down to 500 acres pretty quick, 600 acres pretty quick, 1,000 acres, but 10% of the land, 5% of the land pretty quick. Now it might be that you get permission to hunt this giant parcel of private and it's 500 acres. We'll look in there, cancel, do the same thing, be very critical, narrow it down to 50 acres, 100 acres out of 500, or 100 acres or less out of 1,000. Start to narrow it down based on people. So it's almost like you're hunting people to begin with. What are you left over with? Look for diversity. You look at those aerial photos, and when you start looking at lots of color and shape, where you know there's timber harvest areas, where you have swamps, edges, that all equals diversity. And the more edge you have in a given area, edges that aren't restrictive to deer, for example, giant cliffs where deer don't want to get near because they can't go one side, they're hemmed in, or big waterways, they're going to stay away from there because they can't go one direction, it takes it out. So I'm looking for areas that feature a lot of changes: age of timber, type of timber, clear cuts, swamp edges where they meet hardwoods. Look for all that diversity. And a lot of times on an aerial photo, like when you look at some of our favorite HuntWise maps and you choose the right map, you just look at it, you'll see a lot of different color. For example, just this is looking at very limited. If it's a May or even June flyover in northern areas, you'll see the only trees with color at that time might be oaks because they're the last ones to leaf out. And there'll be a little bit of a brownish leaf or even reddish sometimes on an aerial photo before they eventually turn green. Aspen in those areas, like good stands of aspen, can be a lighter green. Swamp can be black smears, whether you have tag alder or a conifer. So you're starting to look at where do all these colors come into shape. And now we can talk about topo too. I'm looking in hill country. If there are a lot of hills, you're looking for flats. If you're in big mountainous areas in Virginia, West Virginia, and you're looking for whitetails, you're looking at typically not the super steep bottom cuts. You're looking at those tops where they get rounded and flat. That's where you're going to have the most mass crop. And a lot of times in those areas, those deer relate to those big mass crop tops in open flats, and they're really not getting that far down the hill because it gets broken, cut, and they can't move freely through those rocky bottoms and deep gorges. So they're staying up top. That doesn't mean they're always in top. That means they're just staying in their area where they can actually travel and move around. I'm looking for flat areas on the side of hills where those topo lines widen out. I'm looking for flats on ridge points or flats just below the ridge point on a bench system. Looking for those saddles where you have a knob here, and then you have that low spot in between. That's where deer cross when they're going across a ridge system. When you combine those topo areas where there's hills and then all those features of habitat and change of color from the air, then you find that diversity. When I find that diversity, now I'm looking at where are funnels. And so I'm looking at the outside edge of a swamp where it meets a big open hardwoods and there's a lot of diversity in between. And all of a sudden it necks down between that big open hardwoods where deer probably aren't. So you have big open hardwoods like this that come in. And then I have a swamp over here in this area right here where it constricts and it's only 150 yards wide. That's that funnel area. Maybe I find a huge giant swamp and the swamp is all the way around like that. Well, you know where deer are not going to travel through the swamp. They're going to travel around the swamp. If I have open timber around here, if I have good habitat through here, if I look at it like this is really steep terrain and I have a bench where it flattens out along that water, I look at where I have open timber up top. Maybe they took out a clear cut area right here. I'm hunting a clear cut strip. Maybe I found a clear cut where it's just fresh, and that clear cut is a big open square they cut in the woods, and this is all open, good browse habitat because it's in the first or second year. But those deer are going to travel around those inside corners, and if those meet those locations for distance away from roads, parking areas, cabins, human areas, then I'm going to go check those areas out. So I'm looking for those areas diversity, and I'm going to find funnels where habitat comes together, narrows down, inside corner of a big clear cut, swamp edges where they meet river systems and change of habitat all comes together, where I could say, yeah, it makes sense that a buck would follow that edge right there in that funnel. So after I find that new spot, cancel acres, look for diversity, I find those funnels within that diversity, you'll find that you've been looking at 10,000 acres, you've narrowed it down to a few spots that total 30, 40 acres apiece across that entire 10,000 acre landscape. And then I'm looking at, okay, if I'm going to hunt there, how do I get in there? How do I get in there with this wind? If I find a spot within that funnel on either side of it, what winds can I hunt that funnel with? And how does that affect how I get in there? Where do I expect the deer in the morning where I come in? Where do I expect them in the evening? And then I go in there and I look at that access location, and I can actually on a map, I think I want to stand there. I want to stand there. And then I want to look at these 3 or 4 areas over here. And then I look at those 3 or 4 areas out of 10,000 and I verify with a historical sign. So I go in there and say, this is a good approach. I don't think there's people here. I've narrowed it down to this diversity, these funnels within that diversity. And then I go verify. There should be rubs, not just from last year, but years. I look for trees that are bowed, they've been carved out. You can tell they've been rubbed many years over, broken limbs from scrapes a year before. And that's what I like to do to e-scout. So I'm spending 80% of my time looking at this on maps. Maybe you have the type of place when I work, I work. I can't do anything else. But I know a lot of normal jobs out there, 40 hours a week, people get away with, even if they're spending 10 hours out of 50 a week online or doing whatever they want. There's a lot of e-scouting that takes place at work. I can guarantee. Don't tell me there's not. I know out there are. But bottom line is, then when you get up all that pulled together, you've already narrowed down all this. Then it's a matter of take a Saturday, go out, check those areas off your list, verify trees you might want to hang a stand in later, and then plan on going to hunt. And it might even be that you look at all this stuff and you think, okay, I'm going to go wing it. I'm going to go out there for the season. You go check, you speed scout each one of these areas, find some fresh sign. It all makes sense because you've already made sense of it in many different ways, and you go out and kill something. Dylan, you've done that.
I was literally doing the same thing 10 days ago in the UP of Michigan. I looked at the maps for probably 4 or 5 hours, and I spent an hour and a half on the ground. And that was with boating from spot to spot. So.
That's pretty cool. It's fun, too.
Awesome.
But you feel like it's narrowed in, and then you verify with sign, and you're kind of like, oh, I'm pretty locked in.
It's super satisfying when you're like, ooh, this is starting to look good. And then you start to see that sign. You start to see even old scrapes where there's branches broken from licking branches, and then you see some rubs with those gouges, and you're like, man, this is it.
I think so many people look at it like, okay, I might want to hunt this area. I need to spend days walking and look for sign and try to figure it out. Yeah. It should be figured from a big picture framework before you ever even get into the woods. And if it's not, you're going to be wasting a lot of time, and you're probably not going to end up with a good spot to hunt because it's got to make sense a lot of different ways. So we did that in Pennsylvania last year. A lot of fun. There's reasons the deer should be moving through there. Where Jen was at, she saw does, we saw a buck. So that was the difference. But the bottom line is, it doesn't matter if you're bow hunting, gun hunting, big parcel private, a lot of public land out there. Make some sense of it. Narrow it down. Maybe add a step or two of your own that works. Come up with a system, and you'll be on target for bucks and good deer hunting in general for the rest of your life. It's Monday, and that means big shipment time for seeds. We have a lot of orders over the weekend, and Daryl in New York, he bought a lot of seed. In fact, a lot of this pallet is his. We've shipped to 48 states so far. We haven't shipped any to Alaska and Hawaii, but Daryl, we have some extra goodies coming your way. We appreciate it. We'll try to do that every week too. So we really thank you guys. This is that time of year. We have lots of seed going out the door. Wes is working hard behind me, getting that out, and we try to get that out the next day after your order.
Perfect.